Hey guys, this is Nick Marinaro. For Module 6, data collection, I'm going to be taking a look at surveys. Question 1, how would you describe this data collection technique? It's a way to collect and group quantitative data, so that's what we're going to be measuring here. The nice thing with surveys is that you can use them in a variety of different ways. You can use a verbal style, using an interview, or written form. Your survey can be simple, it can be complex. It could be a simple, I've done surveys within my class before that are one question. I've done surveys that are, 15, 20 plus. The style of the questions could be a mix of open and closed-end questions. They could be a bunch of simple yes or no's. It depends. It's unlimited possibilities of how you might craft your survey. Down here's a sample question here. Please indicate how much you agree or disagree with the following statements about your school. So you could have your students respond in a variety of different ways here. What processes and procedures are unique to the technique? Again, the options to have open-ended or closed-ended questions. It provides choices that can direct a respondent. If you're looking and you want to measure specific responses, you have the option to do so. And again, it's multiple formats. You can use face-to-face interviews, phone interviews. You can have paper or online forms that you can use to get responses from your subjects there. So an example of this would be I used a Google form here last week for my entrepreneurship program to get some information from them from next year. So I had some yes/no questions. I have an open-ended question here. And then I can easily, measure the response and measure the data immediately to see what I'm looking at for next year. Like I'm trying to get a gauge on how many students want to take an online dual credit, or not an online, a dual credit program that we actually have with Millersville next year. So I'm trying to get an idea of that and how often I'll be able to see them next year. So that's one nice thing that you get out of that online form. And I got the information back immediately. Again, closed-end and open-end questions. Both have benefits. Both can also have the negatives to them as well. It could be, you might feel like you're controlling your subject by limiting to these responses, but by opening it up, you might get a bunch of responses that you don't really want to take a look at or measure as well. The nice thing with open-ended, you may get a variety of responses, but you can easily categorize them into groups to be better able to analyze your data there. Using a Likert scale as well is nice because it allows you to actually measure the strength of the response, not just the response itself, to the extent of which somebody might agree or disagree, which is a nice option to have. A Likert type scale also, you might want to measure the quality or frequency of the response here as well. How do you feel that you did on that last test? Very poor, poor, average. And you get an idea of maybe the attitude or the feelings that your students might have on a specific course at that time. Is it qualitative or quantitative? We talked about that being quantitative data. Obviously, the results and analysis provided would be in numerical data. The types of questions that are best going to be answered are going to be about attitudes, perceptions, and opinions. That's the main thing that you're looking at, and it's very beneficial, especially being in a classroom. These are the types of things that I want to be looking at and measuring all the time. And I often poll my kids about, when we're looking at a unit that we're doing, to see where they're at, to see how they feel about it. Do they, I'll pull them at the beginning of a course and I'll pull them at the end to see like how those responses change, from the beginning to the end there. Some of the strengths of the data, it's quick, easy to compile and interpret, especially using something like a Google form. I can immediately have graphical data as well to take a look at and basically see my responses. The limitless nature of being able to do a survey, gives you lots of options with the styles. One of the nice things too, you can actually use, you use a graphic to measure your responses. If you're talking about young children that can't read yet, you can have them point to, a happy face or a frown, to get a response from them that way as well. The weaknesses would be, depending on the type of scale that you're using or the options that you're using in a survey, you could be controlling the responses too much by not providing that variety or that option. which could skew your results. Um, another another issue that could be of concern is when you have a neutrality option when you're using a Likert scale. The nice thing about it is that it's there. So if you need a neutral option, obviously some people are neutral in certain subjects, but also gives the option for them to not have to think about their response. I don't know. I never really thought about that. I'm neutral. Well, if you remove that option, you make the respondent think about the response and make them take, a specific stand on something. And at the same time, if you remove it, maybe you are forcing them into make a decision or decide on something that they really don't have any kind of decision on. What concerns do you have about data collection technique from a validity, reliability, and or ethical perspective? As far as reliability, I think it can be a very reliable tool. I think anytime I'd use a form in my classroom, I'm going to get reliable data every time. I could run it 100 times, I'll probably get the same responses. The issue with it, especially being, you have to take a look at the motive of the student, the way they're answering specific questions. Do they want to answer a certain way to get you off their case? Maybe they're looking at answering a specific way because maybe they think that's what I want them, or that's how I want them to answer. So it's not always a very valid tool in that way. You also have to take a look at the questions that you craft and remove any kind of bias you might have. In my school right now, we're looking at replacing some of our textbooks with online books. So if I ask them a question like, do you want to replace, your old dirty textbook with a nice online book? They're probably going to say yes because of the way I crafted the question. If I ask them, do you have a preference of an online book versus a traditional textbook? I might get a different type of response there. So you got to remove bias from your question that way. As far as from an ethical standpoint, especially when you are doing a survey, you're going to have a lot of information, and some of it could be pretty private too as well. So you have to make sure that you preserve anonymity there for your students or for whoever your subjects are going to be, protect their identities. If it is going to be a form that you're going to keep and store and keep for a while, maybe go back to, you have to make sure that you're keeping and storing that in a safe, confidential place, that anybody else that digs into it and finds it, there's no way that those students or their responses could be identified. Especially when they're sharing any kind of opinion. It could be opinions about the school itself. Maybe they're sharing opinions about, maybe another teacher, another course, class, something like that they don't necessarily want that information to get out. So again, a survey is is a good tool to use. I use them all the time. They're easy to use when you have something like a Google form. But there are, areas that you need to be concerned and have to be careful with. And that's about it. Thanks.